There is a moment that happens to certain people, and you might be one of them, where you're sitting in a quiet room and suddenly you realize that nothing feels the way it used to feel. Not because something terrible happened, not because your life fell apart, but because something shifted inside, something that moved without permission, and now the world looks the same but feels completely foreign. You might be listening to music that used to make you cry, and instead you feel nothing. Or you're with people you love and there's a distance inside you that wasn't there before, a strange separation between you and the warmth that's supposed to be there. This isn't sadness exactly. It's something more like a numbness that comes with clarity, a coldness that arrives alongside understanding. You start to wonder if something is wrong with you, if you've broken something fundamental that can't be repaired, if you've somehow become incapable of feeling the way other people feel. This is the moment where the spiral often begins. Because once you notice it, you can't unsee it. You begin to examine yourself from the outside. You watch yourself going through the motions of living, smiling when you're supposed to smile, laughing when laughter is expected, saying the words that keep the machinery of social existence running smoothly. And it all starts to feel like a performance, not an intentional one, not something you're doing on purpose, but a performance nonetheless, like you're watching yourself from above, observing the character that wears your face, following a script that everyone around you seems to know, but that you can no longer remember. This is where the fear really takes root, because now you're asking yourself questions that most people never dare to ask. Am I depressed? Have I become some kind of emotionally dead thing? Is there something fundamentally wrong with my capacity to experience joy? Have I become arrogant, too intellectual, too detached from what makes life worth living? The thought creeps in that maybe you've damaged yourself somehow, pushed too hard into consciousness, asked too many questions, seen too much behind the curtain, and now you can never go back to the comfortable darkness where everyone else seems to live. You begin to suspect that you might be broken in a way that's too deep to fix, and the worst part is that you can articulate it. You can see it clearly. You can describe exactly what's wrong. Other people who are depressed or suffering can at least point to a reason, a loss, a failure, a trauma. But you might have everything. Your life might look fine from the outside. That makes it worse somehow. Because if you're feeling this way, despite having no external reason to feel this way, then it must mean something is intrinsically wrong with who you are. You must be cold. You must be dead inside. You must have become the kind of person who is incapable of genuine connection or authentic joy. And this self-accusation, this internal verdict, becomes almost a relief in some strange way, because at least it explains things. At least you have a diagnosis for your own emptiness, but it's a diagnosis that feels terminal. What Richard Feynman understood, and what very few people speak about with any honesty, is that this experience is not a malfunction. This is not depression in the way we typically understand it. This is not an illness that needs fixing. This is something far more subtle and far more important, and it's happening inside you right now for a reason that has nothing to do with pathology and everything to do with the structure of consciousness itself. Feynman lived in a world that demanded constant explanation, constant certainty, constant intellectual performance, but he also lived with a kind of lucidity that most people spend their entire lives running from. He understood that when you stop being able to feel excitement about the things that excited you before, when the glitter falls away from everything, when you start to see the mechanism beneath the magic, you're not experiencing a failure of your emotional system. You're experiencing a natural evolution. You're shifting from one mode of existence to another. And that shift always feels like death because in a way it is. A part of you is actually dying. The self that could be fooled by surface excitement is dissolving. The self that could absorb itself completely in distraction and stimulation is losing its grip. The self that could believe in the story it was telling itself about life is beginning to see the scaffolding that holds that story up. Think of consciousness like someone waking up from a deep dream. In the dream, everything is vivid. The emotions are real. The stakes feel absolute. The story is consuming. You believe everything that's happening to you in the dream is happening to you. And then something begins to disturb the dream. A crack appears, a logical impossibility that your sleeping mind can no longer smooth over. And instead of the dream collapsing immediately, instead of waking up all at once, there's a long, exhausting period where you're caught between sleeping and waking. You're no longer fully invested in the dream because you've seen the crack, but you're not yet fully awake either. You're in a kind of liminal space, still lying in the bed, still the old self in some ways, but already partly aware that what you're experiencing isn't as solid as you thought. And in that space, everything loses some of its enchantment. Not because anything is actually wrong, but because your eyes are opening. The dream is no longer working on you because you're starting to see it as a dream. Or consider it like an actor who has spent years fully committed to playing a character. The training taught them to disappear into the role completely, to merge themselves so thoroughly with the character that the boundary between actor and role becomes invisible. But then one day something happens. Maybe they see themselves in the mirror backstage, or they become aware of the mechanics of their own performance, or they step out into the wings and see the machinery that creates the illusion on stage. And suddenly, they can no longer perform the role in the same way. They can still perform it. They still know all the lines. They can still make the audiences respond. But now there's a part of them that remains aware of the performance. They've caught a glimpse of what it means to be the actor, not just the character. And because of that knowledge, they can never again be completely absorbed in the role the way they were before. The magic doesn't die, but it transforms into something different, something more complex, because now both the actor and the character exist simultaneously in consciousness. This is what's happening inside you. You haven't become broken or dead or cold. You've simply started to wake up from a specific kind of dream, and the waking process is uncomfortable precisely because you're caught in the middle of it. The part of you that could lose itself completely in distraction, that could be wholly absorbed in sensation, that could believe without the constant whisper of awareness in the background, that part is in the process of transforming. And there is no fast way through this. There is no shortcut that skips over the discomfort, because the discomfort is not a symptom of something wrong. The discomfort is the actual material of the transformation itself. It's what happens when one mode of consciousness begins to release its hold and another mode starts to take its place. The coldness you feel is not the death of emotion. It's the suspension of automatic feeling. It's the pause that happens between stimulus and response when you're no longer unconsciously controlled by every impulse that arises. The numbness is not an absence of capacity for joy. It's a rest. It's a stillness that has to come so that something different can eventually emerge. The distance between you and others that you sometimes feel is not alienation in the pathological sense. It's the natural space that opens up when you become aware of the machinery of connection, when you see how much of human bonding is based on mutual unconsciousness, on the agreement to believe certain things without questioning them, to feel certain ways without examining them. You're not broken. You're in a transition, and transitions are always uncomfortable. They always involve loss. Something is being left behind, and that something had its own value, its own truth, the capacity to be completely lost in music, completely absorbed in a conversation, completely convinced by your own narrative about yourself. These things had their own kind of beauty, and it makes sense that as they recede, you would feel a grief about that loss, even if you don't have language for it, even if you can't quite explain to yourself what you're mourning. You're not mourning the loss of capacity exactly. You're mourning the loss of innocence that made those experiences possible. But here's what needs to be said clearly, because this is where people often go wrong in the moment of recognizing this shift. Becoming aware of the dream does not make you enlightened. Seeing the machinery does not make you superior. Stepping out of unconsciousness is not an achievement that makes you better than other people. This is perhaps the single most dangerous moment in this process, because the ego, which is itself just another mechanism of consciousness, can easily co-opt this new awareness and turn it into a kind of spiritual arrogance. You can start to feel like you've transcended, like you've woken up while others sleep, like you've seen something true while others remain fooled. And if you fall into that trap, you're just building a more sophisticated cage. You're just creating a more intellectual form of the same unconsciousness you thought you were leaving behind. The truth that Feynman kept coming back to again and again in his life was that clarity and understanding do not make you a better person. They don't make you more worthy of love or more capable of connection. They don't place you on a higher tier of human existence. They simply change the way you see things. And yes, that change can become a kind of imprisonment if you're not careful. You can become cold because you're judging yourself and others constantly. You can become distant because you see the futility in the rituals everyone else is performing. You can become arrogant because understanding feels like power. You can use your own awakening as a weapon against yourself and others, as a reason to feel superior, as justification for emotional detachment disguised as clarity. This is the moment where most people who have this kind of awakening experience go wrong. They mistake the cold distance of clear seeing for enlightenment. They confuse the breakdown of automatic feeling for a superior mode of existence. They begin to see themselves as beyond the emotional needs that everyone else has. They become proud of their own emptiness, seeing it as evidence of their advancement. And in that pride, they lose the very thing that this transition is actually meant to open toward, a more genuine, more integrated, more real way of being in the world. The irony is vicious. The very clarity that could potentially lead you toward a truer form of connection can instead become the justification for total isolation. The very lucidity that could help you move through this transition can instead lock you inside it. So if you're in the middle of this right now, if you're feeling the weight of this strange clarity, if you're recognizing yourself in this description, then the most important thing to understand is that you're not broken, but you're also not done. You're not enlightened and you're not fallen, you're simply in between. And the task now is not to cling to the new clarity as if it proves something about you. The task is not to identify with the observer of the performance and take pride in your distance. The task is to keep moving, to feel the coldness without believing that the coldness means you're dead, to see the machinery while remaining willing to feel the music, to understand the dream without treating waking life as a lesser mode of existence. Because there's something that happens after the initial breaking, after you've been sitting with this numbness and distance long enough, after you've stopped trying to force yourself back into feeling the way you used to feel. And it's so quiet that most people miss it entirely. Most people see the coldness and think that means they need to do something about it. Fix it, heal it, get back to feeling alive. And in that effort to fix it, they prevent the actual transformation from completing itself. What actually happens, if you let it, is that something softer begins to emerge underneath the cold clarity. Not the old feeling, not the automatic excitement and stimulation, but something steadier, something more real, a kind of quiet aliveness that doesn't need constant stimulation to prove that it exists. Joy, when it comes after this kind of passage, is not a spike. It's not the rush that used to come from music or achievement or connection. It's something much quieter. It's a kind of warmth that exists in the background of your life, not dependent on anything external to validate it. It's the capacity to be genuinely interested in things without being addicted to them. It's the ability to connect with people without needing that connection to prove that you exist. It's a kind of clarity that doesn't separate you from life anymore, but actually allows you to participate in it more fully, more honestly, because you're not constantly performing, constantly seeking the next thing that will make you feel real. This is what Feynman was trying to point toward when he kept talking about curiosity without the need for answers. About the ability to be genuinely interested in things without needing them to be important. About finding pleasure in understanding, not as a step towards some greater achievement, but as an end in itself. He was describing a mode of being that had passed through the cold fire of clarity and come out the other side without being burned, because it had released the things that could burn in the first place. The attachment to outcomes, the need to feel a certain way, the demand that life should excite you constantly, the requirement that your own existence should prove something about you. So what you're experiencing right now, if this is speaking to your actual condition, is not an illness and not an achievement. It's a threshold, and the crossing of thresholds is always uncomfortable. People on the other side of the threshold look different to you now, still lost in the dream, still absorbed in the story, still unable to see the machinery. And you might feel superior to them, or you might feel grief for them, or you might feel isolated from them. These are all natural responses when you've seen something that changes your perspective. But the truth is that you're not actually on a higher level. You're just in a different place. You're in the uncomfortable middle, and there's no way out except through it. The people who emerge from this passage with some kind of grace are the ones who don't cling to their new clarity, who don't use it as a weapon against themselves or others, who don't mistake the cold distance for truth, who remain willing to feel, even in the middle of understanding, who can see the machinery and still be moved by the music, not because they're fooling themselves, but because both things are true. The machinery is there, the music is still real. You don't have to choose between understanding and feeling. You just have to move through the space where both are true simultaneously, and that space is where real maturity lives, not in the dream, Not in the cold clarity alone, but in the integration of both. And when you get there, it's not dramatic. It's not a moment of enlightenment where everything suddenly makes sense. It's more like the slow return of warmth after a long winter. It's the ability to feel genuine interest in things again without needing them to be ultimate. It's the capacity to love people without needing them to complete you. It's the freedom to enjoy beauty without demanding that it means something cosmic. It's the strange peace that comes from understanding that your life doesn't need to be either a performance or a prison. It can just be a life, real, limited, temporary, and somehow perfect in its limitation. This is the final truth that keeps coming back in all the important philosophical and scientific work, in the writing of people like Feynman, in the actual lived experience of people who have moved through their own awakening. The goal is not to stay awake in the sense of being constantly vigilant and aware. The goal is to become whole again, but consciously this time, to reintegrate the dreamer and the observer, to be able to lose yourself in things without being completely lost, to be able to see the machinery without being poisoned by that seeing, to be alive in both senses at once, present and aware, feeling and understanding, engaged and clear. You are not broken, you are becoming. And the discomfort you feel is not a symptom of failure. It's the sensation of moving. Keep moving. Don't try to go back. Don't try to force your way to the other side. Just keep moving through it with as much honesty and gentleness as you can manage, and trust that the human nervous system is designed to eventually settle into something new, something more real, something that doesn't require constant stimulation to feel alive. Something that knows how to be joyful in a way that's not dependent on being high, being special, being right, or being better than anyone else. Something that can finally just be.